Imagine this, you're 7 months pregnant, scrolling through your phone in the doctor's waiting room, when a text pops up, not for you, but for your husband. It's from his mistress, and it shatters your world. But that's just the beginning. What follows is a web of lies. Stolen money planted in your purse, an arrest in front of your neighbors, and a fight for your life against a cunning con artist who wants you behind bars. This is the gripping tale of Sarah Mitchell, betrayed, framed, and pregnant, whose epic comeback doesn't just clear her name, it owns the entire bank. Twists, tears, and triumph await in this roller coaster story you won't want to miss. Stay tuned till the end if you're as hooked as I am. Smash that like button, drop a comment with your wildest betrayal story, share this with a friend who needs some inspiration, and subscribe with notifications on for more jaw-dropping dramas like this. Let's dive in. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her maternity dress for the third time, smoothing the fabric over her 7-month pregnant belly as she sat in the familiar waiting room of Dr. Henderson's obstetrics practice. The soft lavender walls and gentle music should have been calming, but today something felt different. Maybe it was the way David had rushed out this morning without his usual goodbye kiss, or how he'd been working late every night for the past month. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through Pinterest, saving nursery ideas to her board titled, "Baby Boy Mitchell Coming Soon." A soft smile crossed her face as she imagined little hands reaching for the mobile she'd picked out. After Emma, now 12, she'd thought their family was complete. This surprise pregnancy at 38 had been a gift she never expected. The phone buzzed in her hand. A text message notification appeared at the top of her screen, but it wasn't meant for her. The message was addressed to David, and it had somehow appeared on her device due to their shared iCloud account, something they'd set up years ago for convenience and never thought to change. "Can't wait to hold you tonight, my love. These secret meetings are driving me crazy. I need more than stolen moments in your office. Amanda." The phone slipped from Sarah's suddenly numb fingers, clattering onto the waiting room's hardwood floor. Other expectant mothers looked over with concern, but Sarah barely noticed. Her world had just tilted off its axis. Amanda Chen, David's ambitious young loan officer, who he'd mentioned more and more frequently over the past few months. The one who was really going places in banking and who understood the business like no one else. The one David insisted was just eager to learn from experienced management. Sarah's hands shook as she picked up the phone and scrolled through more messages. The thread went back months. Intimate conversations, photos she couldn't bear to look at, and plans that made her stomach turn. Her husband of 15 years, the man she trusted with her heart, her future, and now their unborn child, had been living a double life. Sarah Mitchell. The nurse's voice seemed to come from underwater. I need a moment," Sarah managed, clutching her purse and phone. "I'll be right back." She stumbled to the parking lot, Denver's autumn air hitting her flushed cheeks like a slap. Leaning against her SUV, she dialed David's number with trembling fingers. "Hey, sweetheart," David's voice came through cheerfully. "How's the appointment going? Everything okay with little man?" "Who is Amanda to you?" "David." The words came out steadier than she felt. There was a pause. Too long of a pause. "Amanda, she's my loan officer. You know that. Why?" "The messages." "David." "I saw the messages." Another pause, then David's voice changed, became cooler, more calculated. "Sarah, you're 7 months pregnant. Your hormones are all over the place. Amanda's friendly, maybe too friendly, but she's just overly enthusiastic about work. You're reading something into nothing." It was the gaslighting that broke her. Not just the affair, but the immediate attempt to make her question her own sanity. She thought of Alicia Florrick from The Good Wife, standing in that hotel room as her world crumbled, and wondered if she had that kind of strength. "David, I'm not stupid. I know what I read. Look, we'll talk about this at home. You need to focus on the baby right now. This stress isn't good for either of you." The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, rain beginning to fall in a light mist that seemed to mirror the tears she felt building behind her eyes. She was alone in a parking lot, pregnant and betrayed, with no idea that her nightmare was just beginning. Inside his corner office at Denver Community Bank, David Mitchell stared at his phone with growing panic. Amanda Chen looked up from the financial reports spread across his desk, her perfectly manicured eyebrows raised in question. "Problems at home?" Amanda asked, her voice carrying a slight accent that David found exotic and exciting, so different from Sarah's Midwestern directness. "She knows," David said simply. Amanda's expression didn't change, but her mind was already racing. At 28, she'd worked too hard to get this close to her goal. David was supposed to be her stepping stone to financial security, not a complication. She'd spotted his weakness the moment she'd been hired. A middle-aged man feeling invisible, married to a woman who'd let herself go during pregnancy, desperate for attention from someone young and beautiful. But Amanda had bigger plans than just being a mistress. She'd been planning this moment for weeks. "How much does she know?" Amanda asked, and moving closer to David's chair. "Just about us. The texts." "Then we accelerate the timeline," Amanda said, her voice taking on a hardness that David had never heard before. "I've been preparing for this possibility." "What do you mean?" But Amanda was already on her phone, typing rapidly. "Just trust me. David, I'll handle this. Your wife won't be a problem much longer." Back in the parking lot, Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Officer Rodriguez with Denver PD. We need to speak with you about some irregularities at your husband's bank. Could you come down to the station?" "I don't understand. What kind of irregularities?" "Ma'am, it would be better if we discuss this in person. Are you available this afternoon?" Sarah's world spun faster. "Officer, I'm pregnant and I'm having a very difficult day. Can you please tell me what this is about?" "There's been a report of missing funds. Mrs. Mitchell? Your name has come up in the investigation." The phone slipped from her fingers again, this time cracking against the asphalt. As she bent awkwardly to retrieve it, she noticed a package by her front tire that hadn't been there before. A small manila envelope with her name written in block letters. Inside was a USB drive and a note, "You deserve to know the truth about your husband. This is bigger than an affair." A friend. Sarah sat in her car for 20 minutes, staring at the USB drive. The rain had picked up, drumming against her windshield like impatient fingers. She thought about the baby inside her, about Emma at school having no idea that her family was about to implode, about 15 years of marriage that apparently meant nothing. Finally, she started the engine and drove home, the USB drive burning a hole in her purse like evidence of a crime she didn't yet understand she'd been framed for. At the bank, Amanda Chen stood at the window of David's office, watching the parking lot below. She'd seen Sarah's car, had watched her discover the package, had observed her breakdown. Everything was going according to plan. "David," she said without turning around, "in about 6 hours, your wife is going to discover that $3,000 in cash from a missing deposit has been found in her purse. The security cameras that might have shown how it got there will unfortunately malfunction at exactly the wrong moment." David looked up from his computer where he'd been frantically deleting emails. "What are you talking about?" Amanda turned, and for the first time, David saw her for what she really was. The sweet, ambitious girl he'd been having an affair with was gone, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "I'm talking about survival. David, you and I have been having an affair. That's unfortunate but not criminal. But if your wife goes to the police about us, they might start looking into other things. Things like how you've been covering your gambling debts by shifting funds between accounts. Things like how I've been helping you do it." "Amanda, what gambling debts? I don't gamble." She smiled, and it wasn't pretty. "You do now. I have months of documentation proving it. Casinos you've never been to. Debts you've never incurred. But your signature is on everything. Amazing what you can accomplish with modern technology." David's blood ran cold. "Why are you doing this?" "Because, darling David, you were never the prize. You were just the key to the vault. And now that your wife knows about us, she's going to want answers. The kind of answers that could ruin both of us. Unless she's too busy dealing with her own criminal charges to ask questions. Outside, Sarah Mitchell drove home through the rain, carrying a USB drive that would reveal her husband's affair and a baby who would be born into a world where his mother was about to be branded a thief. The perfect storm was just beginning. Sarah's hands shook as she inserted the USB drive into her laptop. Emma's backpack and school shoes scattered around the kitchen table like evidence of normal life. A life that was about to shatter completely. The pregnancy had made her emotional. But this was different. This was the kind of fear that started in your bones and spread outward. The files loaded slowly, and Sarah found herself holding her breath. Security footage from David's office appeared first, time-stamped 3 months ago. She watched her husband of 15 years pull Amanda Chen close in an embrace that was anything but professional. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly, remembering how that same night David had come home and made love to her with unusual passion. She thought he was excited about the baby. "Oh God," she whispered, fast-forwarding through weeks of intimate moments between David and Amanda. Late nights, weekends when he'd claimed to be reviewing loan applications. The woman was everywhere, sitting on his desk, in his chair, marking her territory with the confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. But it was the financial documents that made Sarah's blood run cold. Bank routing numbers, account transfers, deposits that didn't match the records she'd seen David bring home. Sarah had given up her marketing career when Emma was born, but she still understood numbers. And these numbers told a story that terrified her. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Working late again tonight. Big audit tomorrow. Don't wait up." Sarah screenshot the message and saved it to a new folder on her desktop labeled Evidence. If 15 years of marriage had taught her anything, it was that David was a creature of habit. He never worked late on Tuesdays. Ever. The front door slammed, and Emma's voice carried through the house. "Mom, you home?" Sarah quickly closed the laptop and tried to compose herself. Emma didn't need to see her mother falling apart. Not when Sarah still didn't understand what was happening. In the kitchen, "Sweetheart." Emma appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair pulled back in the messy bun that had become her signature look since starting 7th grade. At 12, she was caught between childhood and adolescence, still young enough to crawl into her mother's lap, but old enough to sense when something was wrong. "You okay, Mom? You look weird." "Just tired. The baby's been active today." Sarah forced a smile and gestured to the chair beside her. "How was school?" Emma shrugged, the universal teenage response, but her eyes remained focused on her mother's face. "Boring." Mrs. Patterson announced the fall fundraiser. "It's this Friday night at the school. $5 for dinner, and they're trying to raise money for new playground equipment." "That sounds nice. We should go." "Really, you haven't been to any school stuff since you got pregnant." The accusation stung because it was true. Sarah had been so focused on preparing for the baby, on being the perfect wife and mother, that she'd let other things slide. Now she wondered if David had been using her withdrawal from social activities as cover for his affair. "Things are going to change," Sarah said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "We're going to the fundraiser." 3 days later, Sarah stood in Jefferson Elementary's crowded gymnasium, her hands resting on her now prominent belly as she watched Emma race around with her friends. The smell of pizza and the sound of children's laughter should have been comforting, but Sarah felt like she was watching life through glass. She'd spent the past 72 hours diving deeper into the USB files, cross-referencing dates and times, building a timeline of her husband's betrayal. The financial documents still confused her, but the affair was undeniable. She'd also noticed that David had been making excuses to avoid being home, claiming work emergencies that she was beginning to suspect were really rendezvous with Amanda. "Sarah, I'm so glad you came." Rita Santos approached with a warm smile, balancing a paper plate loaded with pizza and cookies. Rita lived 3 houses down and had become Sarah's closest friend since moving to the neighborhood 5 years ago. At 52, Rita was divorced, financially successful, and refreshingly honest about the realities of marriage and motherhood. Rita, hi. I needed to get out of the house. Where's David? I thought he'd be here helping with the auction setup. Work emergency, Sarah said automatically, then immediately regretted the lie. Rita's expression shifted slightly. After her own divorce, she'd developed a radar for marital trouble. Honey, you look exhausted, and not just pregnant tired. Are you okay? Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your purse, Mrs. Mitchell. Carefully. Sarah's stomach dropped. She opened her purse and felt around inside, her fingers closing on something that definitely hadn't been there when she'd arrived. An envelope, thick with what felt like cash. I need to use the restroom, Sarah mumbled, clutching her purse to her chest. In the school bathroom. Sarah opened the envelope with shaking hands. $3,000 in cash, mostly 20s and 50s, with a bank deposit slip clipped to the top. The deposit slip was from Denver Community Bank, dated 2 days ago, and marked missing. Report filed. Oh no, oh no, oh no, Sarah whispered, shoving the money back into her purse. Someone had planted stolen money on her. But who and why? Her phone rang, and David's name appeared on the screen. Sarah, where are you? At Emma's school fundraiser, where you said you couldn't come because of work. Right, yes, listen, I need you to come home immediately. There's been a situation at the bank. What kind of situation? Just come home, Sarah, and bring your purse. The line went dead, and Sarah felt like she was going to be sick. This was planned, coordinated, but she still didn't understand why. She found Rita near the dessert table and grabbed her arm. I need you to take Emma home with you tonight. Sarah, what's wrong? You're white as a sheet. I can't explain right now, but I'm in trouble, big trouble, and I don't want Emma to see whatever's about to happen. Rita nodded without hesitation. Of course, but honey, if you need help, I'll call you, Sarah promised, though she wondered if she'd be able to. The drive home felt like a funeral procession. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, but none of them made sense. She was a pregnant housewife who spent her days preparing for a baby and taking care of her family. She didn't steal money. She barely left the house except for doctor's appointments and grocery shopping. But as she pulled into her driveway and saw the police car waiting, she realized that what she knew about herself might not matter. Someone else had written a different story about Sarah Mitchell, and she was about to discover just how convincing they'd made it. 2 officers stood on her front porch next to David, who looked appropriately concerned and confused. The picture of a devoted husband supporting his wife through a difficult time. Mrs. Mitchell, the older officer, his badge reading Detective Morrison, stepped forward. We need to speak with you about some missing funds from Denver Community Bank. I don't know anything about missing funds, Sarah said, clutching her purse tighter. Ma'am, we have a report that you were in the bank earlier this week, and a deposit that was processed during your visit has gone missing. We'd like to search your purse and vehicle with your permission. Sarah looked at David, searching his face for some sign that this was a mistake, that he would protect her. Instead, she saw something that chilled her to the bone: resignation. He already knew what they would find. David, she whispered, just cooperate. Sarah, let them search. If you haven't done anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about. But Sarah had never been inside Denver Community Bank this week. She'd never made a deposit, and the $3,000 in her purse would prove that she was lying. I want to call a lawyer, she said. Detective Morrison nodded. That's your right, ma'am. But the search warrant is already on its way. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. As if on cue, another police car pulled up, and Sarah watched her quiet suburban street transform into a crime scene. Neighbors began emerging from their houses, drawn by the flashing lights and the irresistible pull of someone else's drama. Mrs. Henderson from across the street held her phone up, clearly recording. Sarah imagined the video being uploaded to Facebook within minutes. Pregnant woman arrested in our neighborhood. You won't believe what happened next. And somewhere, she was certain, Amanda Chen was watching and smiling. The handcuffs were surprisingly heavy and cold against Sarah's wrists as Detective Morrison led her toward the police car. Her pregnant belly made it awkward to walk with her hands restrained behind her back, and she stumbled slightly on the uneven driveway. "Careful there, ma'am," Officer Williams said, steadying her elbow. He was younger than Morrison, maybe early 30s, and his voice carried a kindness that made Sarah want to cry. "Please," she whispered, "I'm 7 months pregnant. This is a mistake. Ma'am, we found $3,000 in cash in your purse, along with a deposit slip from Denver Community Bank dated 3 days ago. The deposit was reported missing yesterday morning." Sarah's mind raced as they helped her into the back seat of the patrol car. 3 days ago, she'd been at home all day, dealing with a pregnancy-related doctor's appointment and Emma's science project. She had receipts from Target, proof that she'd been shopping for poster board and colored markers at the exact time the deposit slip was dated. But as the car pulled away from her house, Sarah caught sight of David in her side mirror. He was standing on their front porch, his phone pressed to his ear, and he looked more relieved than devastated. A husband whose innocent wife had been wrongly arrested should be fighting the police, demanding answers, threatening to sue everyone involved. David looked like a man whose problem had just been solved. At the police station, Sarah was processed like any other criminal. Fingerprints, mugshot, paperwork. The booking officer, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, was professionally courteous but clearly unimpressed by Sarah's protests of innocence. "Honey, everyone's innocent until proven guilty," she said, handing Sarah a tissue to wipe the ink from her fingers. "But you had $3 grand in cash and a bank slip showing it was stolen. That's not a good look." "I've never been inside that bank," Sarah insisted. "I can prove where I was that day." "Save it for your lawyer?" The phone call was surreal. Sarah sat in a cold concrete room, staring at a number she'd memorized years ago, but never thought she'd need. David's cousin Marcus was a public defender, someone they saw at family barbecues and holiday dinners. He specialized in drug cases, not white-collar crime, but he was the only lawyer Sarah knew. "Marcus, it's Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. I'm in jail." The silence stretched for so long, Sarah wondered if the connection had dropped. "Sarah, what the hell happened?" She told him everything she could in the 10 minutes they allowed her, from the text messages revealing David's affair to the money planted in her purse. Marcus listened without interrupting, a skill that had made him successful in his field. "Okay," he said finally. "First, don't talk to anyone about anything. Not the other inmates, not the guards. Definitely not any more police officers. I'll be there in an hour to start working on bail." "Marcus, I didn't do this." "I believe you. But Sarah, I have to ask, is there anything about your marriage, your finances, anything at all that you haven't told me?" Sarah thought about the USB drive still hidden in her laptop at home, about the financial documents she didn't understand, about the feeling that David's affair was just the tip of an iceberg she couldn't see. "There's more," she admitted, "but I don't know what it all means yet." "Then we'd better figure it out fast." The jail cell was everything Sarah had seen in movies and worse. The smell of disinfectant couldn't quite cover the underlying odors of desperation and fear. Her cellmate was a woman named Tracy who'd been arrested for writing bad checks, and who seemed genuinely sympathetic to Sarah's situation. "Pregnant and in for theft?" Tracy shook her head. "That's rough. Your husband posting bail." "I hope so." But even as Sarah said it, she wondered if David would come for her, or if this was exactly where he wanted her. Tracy studied Sarah's face with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd seen enough of the criminal justice system to recognize patterns. "Honey, can I give you some advice? In here, there are two kinds of people, those who did what they're accused of, and those who got set up. You've got that set up look." "What do you mean?" "You're too shocked, too confused. People who steal money know they're taking a risk. They have plans for when they get caught. You look like someone who just got hit by a truck." At 2 in the morning, Sarah was released on bail. Marcus met her at the processing desk, his usually cheerful face grim with concern. "David posted it," Sarah asked as they walked to his car. Eventually, it took some convincing. What do you mean? Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her under the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking garage. Sarah, your husband wanted to know if posting bail would make him look guilty of something. He was worried about how it would affect his job at the bank. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. He was worried about his job. I'm pregnant and in jail for something I didn't do. And he's worried about his job. There's more. I've been doing some research on this case, and there are things that don't add up. The security cameras at the bank mysteriously malfunctioned during the exact time window when this deposit allegedly went missing. The anonymous tip that led police to search your purse came from a woman who refused to identify herself. And the deposit slip in your purse. The handwriting analysis is inconclusive. As they drove through the empty Denver streets, Sarah stared out the window at the city she'd called home for 15 years. Everything looked different now, like she was seeing it through the eyes of a different person. The pregnant housewife who'd left for a doctor's appointment 3 days ago no longer existed. Marcus, I need to show you something. At home, the house felt violated despite the fact that the police search had been relatively neat. Sarah could sense that hands other than hers had touched her belongings, opened her drawers, judged her life. David was waiting in the kitchen, still fully dressed despite the late hour. He stood up when they entered, his face carefully arranged in an expression of concern and confusion. Sarah, thank God you're home. This is insane. I can't believe someone would frame you like this. The word choice was interesting. Frame, not mistake or misunderstanding. Frame implied intention, planning, malice. David, we need to talk. Of course, Marcus. Thank you for everything. I know this is going to work out. Marcus glanced between them. Actually, David, I'd like you to stay. I have some questions about the timeline of events. Sarah saw something flicker across her husband's face. Fear, annoyance. I think I should call my own lawyer, David said carefully. Why would you need a lawyer? Sarah asked. You're not the one being accused of theft. No, but I'm a bank manager, and my wife has been arrested for stealing from my bank. This could destroy my career. His career, not their marriage, not their family, not their unborn child's future. His career. Sarah walked to her laptop and opened the files from the USB drive. I need to show you both something. For the next hour, they watched surveillance footage of David and Amanda Chen in compromising positions throughout the bank. Sarah narrated what she'd discovered, while Marcus took notes and David's face grew progressively paler. Where did you get this? David asked when she finished. Someone left it for me? Someone who apparently knows more about what's happening than I do. Marcus was studying the financial documents with growing alarm. Sarah, these show systematic manipulation of accounts over the past 8 months. Money being moved between accounts. Deposits recorded but not processed. Loans approved with unusual terms. I don't understand any of that stuff, Sarah said. I do, Marcus replied grimly. And if these documents are accurate, stealing $3,000 is the least of anyone's problems. This looks like embezzlement on a massive scale. David stood up abruptly. I'm calling my lawyer. Sarah, I love you, but I can't discuss this anymore without legal representation. As he left the room, Sarah heard him on the phone in his office, speaking in low, urgent tones. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear damage control. Sarah, Marcus said quietly, I think your husband is in much deeper trouble than either of us realized, and I think someone is using you to cover their tracks. Amanda, maybe, or maybe David himself. Sarah, I need you to think carefully about your finances. Has David been handling everything, making decisions without consulting you? Sarah thought about the joint savings account she rarely checked, the credit cards David managed, the investments he'd made without her input. She'd trusted him completely, believing that financial management was his area of expertise. Oh God, she whispered, I don't even know how much money we have. Then I think it's time we found out. As dawn broke over Denver, Sarah sat at her kitchen table surrounded by financial documents that painted a picture of a marriage built on lies. David had gambled away their savings, covered his tracks by manipulating bank accounts, and when that wasn't enough, he'd brought in Amanda Chen to help him steal from the bank itself. But Sarah was the one in handcuffs. Sarah was the one facing criminal charges. Sarah was the pregnant woman whose mugshot would be on the evening news. And somewhere in the city, Amanda Chen was probably sleeping peacefully, confident that her plan had worked perfectly. But Sarah Mitchell was beginning to discover something about herself that she'd forgotten during 15 years of being a devoted wife and mother. She was a fighter, and she was about to fight for everything she had left. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell's office was decorated in soothing blues and greens, with abstract paintings that were supposed to be calming but reminded Sarah of storms at sea. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in the oversized chair, her 8-month belly making it difficult to find a position that didn't make her back ache. "Tell me about the numbness," Dr. Hartwell said, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who'd heard every form of human suffering. "It's not physical," Sarah clarified. "It's emotional. I should be furious about the affair, devastated about the arrest, terrified about the trial. Instead, I feel like I'm watching someone else's life fall apart. That's dissociation. It's a normal response to trauma." Dr. Hartwell made a note in her file. "Sarah, you've experienced multiple betrayals in a very short period. Your mind is protecting you the only way it knows how. By making me feel nothing, by giving you the emotional distance to function. You have a daughter to care for, a baby on the way, and a legal battle to fight. Your psyche understands that you can't afford to fall apart right now." Sarah thought about Elizabeth Gilbert's journey in Eat, Pray, Love, how she described feeling like a ghost haunting her own life. But Gilbert had chosen her path to self-discovery. Sarah felt like she'd been shoved onto hers while blindfolded. "I keep thinking about Alicia Florrick," Sarah said, "from The Good Wife, how she stood by her husband even after everything he'd done, until she finally realized she had to save herself. Are you at that point?" Sarah considered the question. 3 weeks had passed since her arrest, and David had moved into the guest bedroom, claiming he needed space to process everything. In reality, Sarah knew he was protecting himself from any appearance of conspiracy. Every interaction between them now felt calculated, performed for an audience of lawyers and investigators. "I filed for legal separation yesterday," Sarah said. "Marcus helped me with the paperwork." Dr. Hartwell nodded approvingly. "How does that feel?" "Terrifying. I haven't worked in 12 years. I don't know how I'll support myself and 2 children, especially with criminal charges hanging over my head. But staying married to David feels like drowning slowly." "What about your support system?" "Rita has been amazing. She's been helping me understand our finances, and it's worse than I thought. David gambled away not just our savings, but he took out credit lines against the house. We're basically broke, except for the money that apparently went missing from the bank." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad says I can't stay at Rita's house anymore. He says Rita is a bad influence. Can you pick me up?" "I have to go," Sarah said, showing Dr. Hartwell the message. "David's trying to control who Emma spends time with. Sarah, document everything. Every interaction, every attempt to limit your access to Emma or your support system. If this goes to family court—" "I know," Sarah gathered her purse, checking to make sure her phone was recording as Marcus had taught her. "It's like he's trying to isolate me from anyone who might help me fight back." Emma was waiting on the front steps of their house when Sarah pulled up. Her school backpack clutched to her chest like armor. At 12, she was old enough to understand that her family was falling apart, but too young to process the complexities of financial fraud and marital betrayal. "Mom, I don't want to stay here anymore," Emma said as soon as she got in the car. "Dad's been on the phone all morning with that woman from his work." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Amanda." "Yeah. He told her you were at therapy and wouldn't be back for an hour. Then he said something about accelerating the timeline." The same phrase Sarah had overheard David use during his hospital phone call. She'd been so focused on the affair and the theft charges that she hadn't considered what else David and Amanda might be planning. Emma, honey, I need you to do something for me, and it's going to sound strange. Okay. I need you to record Dad's phone calls when he doesn't know you're listening. Can you do that with your phone? Emma studied her mother's face with the serious expression she'd inherited from Sarah. Is Dad in trouble? Yeah, and so am I. But I think if we can prove that Dad and Amanda planned this together, we can fix it. Are you going to prison? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She pulled over to the curb and turned to face her daughter fully. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen. But Emma, if something happens to me, I want you to know that everything I'm doing is to protect you and your brother. What about Dad? Sarah looked at her hands on the steering wheel, the wedding ring she still wore out of habit rather than love. I think Dad has been protecting himself for a long time, and he doesn't know how to protect anyone else anymore. That evening, Rita came over with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine that Sarah couldn't drink, but Rita definitely could. They spread the financial documents across the dining room table, creating a timeline of David's fiscal betrayal that went back almost 3 years. Look at this, Rita said, pointing to a series of small withdrawals from their savings account. These started right after Emma's spring break trip to Disney World. 500 here, 1,000 there. Classic pattern of someone trying to fund a gambling addiction without being noticed. I thought he was just being more careful with money because of the baby coming. Oh, honey, he was being careful. Careful not to get caught. Rita poured herself another glass of wine. And when the small thefts weren't enough, he brought in Amanda to help him go bigger. Sarah studied the bank documents Marcus had subpoenaed. But why frame me? Why not just steal the money and disappear? Because you're the perfect cover. Pregnant housewife, no criminal record, trusted member of the community. If you take the fall for the theft, it buys them time to steal much more money and disappear before anyone realizes the scope of what they've done. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting their analysis. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Sarah, I have bad news. David filed for emergency custody of Emma. What? On what grounds? He's claiming you're mentally unstable due to pregnancy hormones and the stress of the criminal charges. He's also alleging that you've been involving Emma in illegal activities by asking her to spy on him. Sarah felt the room spin. He can't take Emma. He can't. The hearing is scheduled for Monday. That's 4 days away. Sarah, I need you to stay calm and not do anything that could be construed as erratic behavior. But calm was the last thing Sarah felt. As she hung up the phone, she realized that David wasn't just trying to frame her for theft. He was trying to take away everything she cared about, leaving her completely powerless to fight back. Rita reached across the table and took her hand. Breathe, honey. We're going to figure this out. How he's always one step ahead. It's like he knows what I'm going to do before I do it. Maybe because he does know. Rita's expression grew thoughtful. Sarah, how did Amanda know you'd found out about the affair? How did she know exactly when to plant that money in your purse? Sarah thought back to that day at the school fundraiser. I don't know. I confronted David over the phone from the doctor's office. But what? But I also told Dr. Henderson's nurse that I was having a family emergency. And the receptionist, she was asking about David. She seemed very interested in whether he was planning to attend the birth. Rita and Sarah stared at each other across the table, the same terrible realization dawning on both of them. Sarah, what was the receptionist's name? Sarah closed her eyes, trying to remember. She was new, young. I'd never seen her before. She said her name was Amy. Amy. Amanda. Close enough to be confused, different enough to maintain plausible deniability. Oh my God, Sarah whispered. She's been watching me, listening to my conversations, tracking my appointments, following my routine, which means she knows about your therapy sessions, your meetings with Marcus, your friendship with me. She knows everything you're doing to fight back. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I have to get Emma. If Amanda has been watching me this whole time, then she knows Emma is recording David's calls. But when Sarah called Emma's cell phone, it went straight to voicemail. And when she called the house, David answered. She's fine, Sarah, but I think it's best if Emma stays with me until the custody hearing. For her own safety. David, you can't keep her from me. I'm her mother. And I'm her father. And right now, you're the parent facing criminal charges for theft and engaging our daughter in illegal surveillance activities. The line went dead, and Sarah sank into her chair, the weight of her situation finally penetrating the emotional numbness that had protected her for weeks. She was pregnant, facing criminal charges, about to lose custody of her daughter, and married to a man who was systematically destroying her life to cover his own crimes. But as Rita had said, there were two kinds of people in jail, those who did what they were accused of, and those who got set up. Sarah had been set up by experts, but she was beginning to understand their game. And understanding, she realized, was the first step toward fighting back. The contractions started at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, 6 weeks before Sarah's due date. She lay in the guest bedroom where she'd been sleeping since David moved into their master suite, timing the waves of pain and trying to decide if this was real labor or just another episode of Braxton Hicks contractions. At 3:45, her water broke, soaking through the sheets and leaving no doubt about what was happening. David, she called, but there was no answer from down the hall. She grabbed her phone and saw a text sent 20 minutes earlier. Staying at the bank tonight. Big audit in the morning. Don't wait up. Sarah laughed, though there was no humor in it. Of course he wouldn't be here for the birth of his son. She was going into premature labor, alone, while facing criminal charges that could send her to prison. She called Rita first, then Marcus, then an ambulance. By the time the paramedics arrived, the contractions were coming every 3 minutes, and Sarah was beginning to panic about the baby's health. Ma'am, how far along are you? The EMT asked as they loaded her onto a gurney. 34 weeks. It's too early. Babies born at 34 weeks do very well, the woman assured her. You're going to Denver General. Sarah nodded, trying to remember her breathing exercises while dealing with the surreal experience of going into labor under police investigation. Would there be officers at the hospital? Would she give birth in handcuffs? At the hospital, the maternity ward staff treated her like any other patient in labor, which was both a relief and a reminder of how isolated she'd become. The nurses were professional and kind, but Sarah could see the recognition in some of their faces. She was the pregnant woman who'd been arrested for theft, the one whose mugshot had been in the local news. Dr. Henderson arrived within an hour, her usual calm demeanor slightly frayed by the early morning emergency. Sarah, the baby's doing well, but we need to slow down this labor if possible. It's early, but not dangerously so. However, I'm concerned about your stress levels. Your blood pressure is elevated. My husband is having an affair with a woman who framed me for theft. I'm facing criminal charges, and there's a custody hearing next week. Of course, my blood pressure is elevated. Dr. Henderson made notes in Sarah's chart. Is David on his way? David is at the bank, working. He doesn't know I'm in labor. The doctor's expression shifted slightly. Would you like me to call him? No. The word came out more forcefully than Sarah intended. I don't want him here. Rita arrived as the labor was intensifying, followed closely by Marcus. They looked like an odd parenting team. Rita with her business attire and no-nonsense attitude, Marcus in jeans and a hastily thrown-on sweater, both clearly having dropped everything to be there. Any word from David? Rita asked. He's working, Sarah said through gritted teeth as another contraction peaked. Working? Right. Rita's tone made it clear what she thought of David's priorities. Marcus was on his phone in the corner, speaking in low tones. When he finished the call, he approached Sarah's bedside with a concerned expression. Sarah, I just spoke with the prosecutor's office. They're aware that you're in labor. Why would they care? Because there's been a development in your case. They want to interview you after the baby is born. What kind of development? Marcus glanced at Rita, then back at Sarah. They've uncovered evidence of a much larger embezzlement scheme at the bank. Your case might be part of something bigger. Sarah felt another contraction building, but this one brought relief along with pain. If there was a larger scheme, maybe that would prove her innocence. That's good news. Right. Maybe. Or maybe they think you were involved in the bigger scheme too. At 8:47 a.m., Michael David Mitchell entered the world weighing 5 pounds, 3 ounces, and screaming with the outrage of someone who'd been forced to arrive before he was ready. Despite his early arrival, he was healthy and pink and perfect. Sarah held him against her chest, marveling at his tiny fingers and the way he seemed to calm when he heard her voice. This was her son, her baby, and nothing that David or Amanda or the legal system did could change that. He's beautiful, Rita said, tears in her eyes. He looks like Emma did as a baby, Sarah observed. David's going to be disappointed. He was hoping for a child that looked like him. Has he even called? Marcus asked. Sarah checked her phone. No missed calls. No texts. No. As if summoned by their conversation, David appeared in the doorway. He looked harried and stressed, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his shirt wrinkled. But he smiled when he saw the baby. And for a moment, Sarah remembered why she'd fallen in love with him 15 years ago. Sarah, he's perfect. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. The audit was incredibly complex and I couldn't leave. Couldn't leave? Or didn't want to leave? Sarah asked. David's smile faltered. This isn't the time for arguments. Can I hold my son? Sarah hesitated, then carefully transferred Michael to David's arms. Despite everything that had happened between them, David was still the baby's father. Michael deserved to know his dad, even if his dad had become someone Sarah no longer recognized. What are we naming him? David asked. Michael, Sarah said firmly. Michael Sarah Mitchell. You're giving him your name as his middle name. I'm the parent who isn't facing criminal charges for stealing from their own bank. David's face darkened. Sarah, we need to talk about that. Privately. Rita and Marcus exchanged glances. We'll give you a few minutes, Rita said, but we'll be right outside. When they were alone, David sat down beside Sarah's hospital bed, still holding Michael. For a moment, they looked like a normal family celebrating the birth of their second child. Sarah, I need you to confess. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Confess to the theft. Take a plea deal. You'll get probation. Maybe a little jail time, but nothing serious. And Emma will understand that you made a mistake, but you're taking responsibility for it. Sarah stared at her husband, the father of her children, the man she'd trusted with her heart and her future. You want me to confess to a crime I didn't commit? It's the best option for everyone. Amanda has evidence that makes you look guilty, and if this goes to trial, you could get years in prison. Think about the children. I am thinking about the children. I'm thinking about what kind of mother confesses to being a thief when she's innocent. David's voice took on the patient tone he used when explaining banking concepts to customers who didn't understand finance. Sarah, you're not innocent. You had the money. You can't explain how it got in your purse. The jury is going to convict you. Unless you and Amanda testify that you framed me. We didn't frame you. Amanda just protected herself when she realized you knew about our relationship. Atworm, by planting stolen money in my purse, by making sure that if our affair came to light, there would be bigger issues to focus on. Sarah felt something shift inside her, like a switch being flipped. The numbness she'd been feeling for weeks suddenly gave way to a burning clarity. Get out, Sarah. Get out of my room. Give me my baby and get out. You're being emotional. Postpartum hormones. Get out! David stood up, still holding Michael. I'm taking him to meet Emma. She's been excited about having a little brother. You can't take him. He needs to stay with me for nursing. The hospital will give him formula. Sarah, I'm his father, and I have rights. Before Sarah could protest further, David walked out of the room with her newborn son. She was alone, bleeding, exhausted, and facing the possibility that she might never get her children back. Rita and Marcus rushed back in, alarmed by Sarah's distress. "He took the baby," Sarah sobbed. "He took Michael." "He can't keep him," Marcus assured her. "Newborns need their mothers. I'll speak to hospital security." But even as Marcus made his calls and Rita held her hand, Sarah realized that David had just shown her exactly how far he was willing to go. He would take her children, her freedom, her entire future if that's what it took to protect himself, and somewhere in the hospital, probably watching from a safe distance. Amanda Chen was seeing her plan work perfectly, but Sarah Mitchell was done being a victim. Her son had been born into a war, and she was going to make sure he grew up knowing his mother was a fighter. FBI agent Carla Reeves didn't look like Sarah's idea of a federal investigator. She was petite, maybe 5'4", with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested she'd seen everything twice. She sat beside Sarah's hospital bed like she was visiting a friend, not interrogating a suspect. "Mrs. Mitchell, I want to start by saying that you are not under arrest, and you're free to have your attorney present for this conversation." Sarah glanced at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "What do you want to know?" "Tell me about Amanda Chen." For the next hour, Sarah recounted everything she knew about Amanda, from the text messages that had revealed the affair to the financial documents on the USB drive. Agent Reeves listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. "Mrs. Mitchell, you're not the first woman to report being framed by Ms. Chen. We've been tracking a pattern of financial fraud across 3 states, always involving bank employees and their female partners or family members who end up taking the blame for theft." Sarah felt a wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy. "You believe me. I believe the evidence. And the evidence suggests that Amanda Chen and her associates have been running this scam for at least 2 years. Her associates, Agent Reeves consulted her notes. Your husband appears to be the most recent recruit, but we've identified at least 4 other men in similar positions who've been manipulated into providing access to bank funds." Manipulated, Sarah thought about David's genuine shock when Amanda had revealed her true nature. "You think David is a victim too?" "Partially. But Mrs. Mitchell, your husband crossed lines that can't be uncrossed. Even if Amanda Chen manipulated him into the affair, he made conscious choices to steal money and frame you for it." Marcus leaned forward. "What are you offering, Sarah?" "Immunity from prosecution in exchange for cooperation. We want Ms. Chen, and we think Mrs. Mitchell might be our best chance to get her." Sarah looked down at her hands, still swollen from pregnancy and IV fluids. 3 days ago, she'd been preparing to go to prison for a crime she didn't commit. Now the FBI was asking for her help to catch the real criminals. "What would I have to do? Wear a wire? Get Amanda to admit what she did? Help us understand the full scope of the operation." "Agent Reeves, Amanda isn't going to confess to me. She thinks she's won. That's exactly why she might be willing to gloat about it." Sarah was discharged from the hospital that afternoon with a clean bill of health and a baby who seemed determined to never sleep for more than 2 hours at a time. Rita had prepared the guest room at her house as a nursery, complete with a crib borrowed from her sister and enough baby supplies to stock a small store. "You're staying here until this mess is sorted out," Rita announced as she helped Sarah settle Michael in his new temporary home. "David can visit the baby, but I don't want you alone with him." "Rita, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do. Sarah, when I got divorced, I had friends who disappeared because taking sides was inconvenient. I swore I'd never be that kind of friend to someone else." Emma arrived that evening, bursting through Rita's front door with an energy that Sarah hadn't seen in weeks. "Mom, I missed you so much, and Michael is so tiny." She carefully took her baby brother, marveling at his miniature features. "He looks like you when you sleep." "Where's your father?" "At home, on the phone with that lawyer again." "Mom, I recorded him yesterday talking to Amanda." Emma pulled out her phone and played a recording that made Sarah's blood run cold. David's voice. "The FBI agent was at the hospital. They're on to us. Amanda's voice. How much does Sarah know? David. Nothing concrete, but Agent Reeves seemed very interested in you specifically. Amanda. Then we accelerate everything. I'm transferring the money tonight. By tomorrow morning, it'll be in accounts that can't be traced. David, what about Sarah? Amanda. What about her? She's exactly where we need her. Isolated, discredited, and focused on her new baby instead of building a case against us. Sarah looked at Marcus, who was already on his phone with Agent Reeves. They're planning to disappear, Sarah said. Tonight. Rita was pacing the living room, her financial advisor mind working through the implications. If they're transferring money tonight, they must have already liquidated everything they can. Sarah, do you have access to any of your joint accounts? Sarah tried logging into their online banking and found that all her access had been revoked. David locked me out of everything. Smart move on his part, but it also means he's been planning this for a while. Agent Reeves arrived within an hour, along with a team of technicians who transformed Rita's dining room into a makeshift command center. They wired Sarah with recording equipment that was nearly invisible and coached her on how to get Amanda to incriminate herself. The key is to make her feel like she's won, Agent Reeves explained. Appeal to her ego. Ask her how she did it. Tell her you're impressed by her planning. People love to brag about their crimes when they think they're safe. Sarah practiced her lines while nursing Michael, the surreal nature of the situation not lost on her. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a suburban housewife worried about nursery decorations. Now she was an FBI informant trying to catch her husband's mistress in a multi-state fraud conspiracy. Mom, Emma said during a break in the preparations. Are you scared? Sarah looked at her daughter's serious face, recognizing her own features mixed with David's stubborn jaw. Yes, sweetheart. I'm terrified. Good. Good, Mox. Dad always says you shouldn't be scared of anything. But Rita says being scared means you understand how important something is. This is important. Right. Catching the bad guys. Yes, it's very important. Then being scared makes sense. That night, Sarah called Amanda from Rita's landline, using a number that wouldn't appear in Amanda's phone as a familiar contact. Amanda, this is Sarah Mitchell. I need to talk to you. There was a long pause. Sarah, I heard you had your baby. Congratulations. Can we meet? There are things I need to understand before I decide what to do about David. What do you mean? I know David stole money from the bank. I know he's been gambling. And I know you helped him. The question is whether I'm going to cooperate with the FBI or protect my family. Another pause. Then, where do you want to meet? Starbucks on 16th Street. 1 hour. Sarah arrived first, choosing a table near the window where the FBI's surveillance team could see her clearly. She ordered a decaf latte and tried to look like a defeated woman who was ready to surrender. Amanda walked in exactly on time, looking as polished and confident as ever. She sat down across from Sarah with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You look tired, Amanda observed. I just had a baby 6 days ago. Of course I look tired. And you're wearing a wire. Sarah's heart stopped. What? Sarah, I've been doing this for 3 years. I know what a desperate woman looks like, and I know what a desperate woman wired by the FBI looks like. The question is, what do you think you're going to accomplish? Sarah realized that her amateur performance had been obvious to a professional criminal, but Agent Reeves had prepared her for this possibility. I'm trying to understand how you did it, Sarah said honestly. How you made everyone believe I was the thief when you and David were the ones stealing. Amanda's smile became genuine for the first time. You really want to know? I'm facing 20 years in prison for something I didn't do? Yes, I want to know. You were perfect, Sarah. The loyal wife, the devoted mother, the woman who gave up her career to support her husband's ambitions. When David started gambling and needed money to cover his debts, you never noticed because you trusted him completely. So you decided to frame me. I decided to use you. David was small time, a few thousand here and there to cover his gambling losses. but he had access to a bank with millions of dollars in deposits. I showed him how to think bigger. And when I found out about the affair, that was actually perfect timing. A betrayed wife acting erratically, making accusations, behaving in ways that seemed unstable. It gave us the perfect explanation for why you might steal money. Revenge against your cheating husband. Sarah felt sick listening to how calculated it had all been. The money in my purse at the school fundraiser? Child's play. I volunteered to help with the event, slipped it in while you were in the bathroom. The bank cameras malfunctioned because I have a friend in building maintenance who owed me a favor. And David. Was he part of this from the beginning? Amanda's expression hardened. David is weak. He wanted the money but not the responsibility. He was perfectly happy to let you take the blame as long as he could keep his job and his reputation. But you're not going to let him keep either of those things, are you? David has served his purpose. By tomorrow, he'll discover that all the money we've stolen has disappeared. Along with me, he'll be left holding the bag for everything. Sarah realized that David was just another victim in Amanda's larger scheme, though not an innocent one. He'd chosen to betray his wife and frame her for his crimes, even if he hadn't understood the full scope of what Amanda was planning. What about Emma and Michael? What happens to them when both their parents are in prison? That's not my problem, Amanda said, standing up to leave. Sarah, you seem like a nice person who got caught up in something you don't understand. Take the plea deal, serve your time, and try to rebuild your life. Because if you keep trying to fight this, you're going to lose everything. As Amanda walked away, Sarah sat alone at the table, processing what she'd just heard. The FBI had their confession, recorded in high-definition audio thanks to the wire she was wearing. But more importantly, Sarah finally understood that she wasn't just fighting for her own freedom. She was fighting for every woman who'd been betrayed by someone they trusted, every mother who'd been used as a shield for someone else's crimes, every person who'd been told they were powerless when they actually held all the strength they needed. Amanda Chen had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated Sarah Mitchell, and that mistake was about to cost her everything. The FBI surveillance van smelled like coffee and electronics, a cramped space filled with monitors, recording equipment, and 3 agents who'd been tracking Amanda Chen's criminal network for 18 months. Sarah sat squeezed between Agent Reeves and a technician named Dave, watching multiple screens showing different angles of the restaurant where she was about to confront David. Remember, Agent Reeves said, adjusting Sarah's wire one final time, we need him to admit to specific crimes: conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, filing false police reports. Generalities won't hold up in court. Sarah nodded, though her hands were shaking. It had been a week since her meeting with Amanda, and the FBI had spent that time building their case while monitoring David's increasingly frantic attempts to contact his partner in crime. Amanda had apparently gone silent, leaving David to face the consequences alone. What if he doesn't confess? Sarah asked. Then we proceed with the evidence we have. But Sarah, your husband is scared and isolated right now. Amanda has abandoned him. The FBI is closing in, and he knows that his window for making a deal is closing fast. Through the van's tinted windows, Sarah could see Cafe Luna, the little Italian restaurant where she and David had shared their first date 16 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her that their marriage would effectively end in the same place it had begun. He's here, Dave announced, pointing to a monitor showing David's BMW pulling into the parking lot. Sarah watched her husband walk toward the restaurant, noting how much weight he'd lost in the past month. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his hair uncombed and his shirt wrinkled. He looked like a man who'd been sleeping badly and eating worse. Okay, Sarah, you're on, Agent Reeves said. Remember, we can hear everything, and we'll move in if there's any sign of threat. Sarah walked into the restaurant on unsteady legs, her postpartum body still feeling foreign and fragile. David was already seated at a corner table, staring into a glass of wine with the intense focus of someone trying to solve complex problems. Thank you for coming, he said without looking up as she sat down. David, we need to talk about what happens next. I know. He finally met her eyes. and Sarah was shocked by how much older he looked. Sarah, I've made terrible mistakes. Yes, you have. I want you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. The gambling started as just entertainment, and when it became a problem, I was too ashamed to tell you. So you decided to steal money from your own bank instead. David flinched. It wasn't supposed to be stealing. I was going to pay it back. Amanda showed me how to move money between accounts temporarily, just until I could get the gambling under control. But you didn't get it under control. No. And when you found out about the affair, Amanda said we needed to protect ourselves. She said if you went to the police about us, they might discover the financial irregularities. Sarah leaned forward, remembering Agent Reeves's coaching about encouraging David to provide details. So Amanda suggested framing me. She said it would just be temporary, a distraction while we figured out how to put the money back. She said you'd never actually be convicted because there wasn't enough evidence. David, there was $3,000 in my purse. That's pretty substantial evidence. That was Amanda's idea. She said we needed something concrete to make the investigation focus on you instead of on the bank's internal systems. Sarah felt nauseated listening to how casually they'd planned her destruction. And you were okay with letting me go to prison to protect yourself. I thought it would never get that far. I thought your lawyer would prove you were innocent. And by then, Amanda and I would have fixed everything. But Amanda didn't want to fix anything. Did she? David's composure finally cracked. She's gone, Sarah. All the money we moved, all the accounts we set up, she cleaned them out and disappeared. She played me just like she played everyone else. Everyone else. There were other banks, other men like me. Amanda showed me newspaper articles about similar cases in Phoenix and Portland. Women who got arrested for theft while their husbands' girlfriends disappeared with the money. Sarah realized that David was finally understanding the scope of what he'd gotten involved in, but his revelation came too late to generate much sympathy. So where does that leave us? Sarah asked. The FBI came to see me yesterday. They offered me a deal, full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. What kind of cooperation? Everything. Amanda's real name, which isn't Amanda Chen, her methods, her contacts, the other banks she's hit. They want me to help them build a case that could bring down her entire network. Sarah studied her husband's face, looking for signs of the man she'd fallen in love with 16 years ago. And in exchange, 5 years in federal prison, probably out in 3 with good behavior. Sarah, that's a gift compared to what I could get if this goes to trial. What about me? What about the charges I'm facing? Agent Reeves said they'd recommend dismissal of all charges against you if I cooperate fully. Sarah felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by anger. You've known for 24 hours that you could clear my name, and you're just telling me now. I needed to think about Emma and Michael. If I take this deal, they'll grow up knowing their father is a convicted felon. David, they're going to grow up knowing that anyway. The question is whether they also grow up knowing their mother was branded a thief for something she didn't do. David reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that felt strange and unwelcome after everything that had happened between them. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you or the children. But you did hurt us. You destroyed our family to cover your own crimes. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it. Sarah withdrew her hand. David, there is no making up for this. You chose Amanda over me. You chose protecting yourself over protecting your children. And you chose to let me take the blame for your crimes rather than face the consequences of your actions. So what happens now? Sarah thought about Michael sleeping peacefully at Rita's house, about Emma starting to trust her mother again, about the possibility of rebuilding a life free from the fear of prison. Now you take the FBI's deal. You tell them everything about Amanda and her network. You serve your time and hopefully learn how to be a better person. And us. There is no us. David, our marriage ended the moment you decided to frame me for theft. David nodded, tears streaming down his face. I deserve that. Yes, you do. As Sarah walked out of the restaurant, She felt lighter than she had in months. The wire she was wearing had captured David's full confession, providing the FBI with everything they needed to close their case against Amanda's network and clear Sarah's name. But more importantly, Sarah had finally said goodbye to the woman she'd been, the trusting wife who'd believed that love and loyalty were enough to protect her family. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, smarter, and infinitely more careful about whom she trusted. In the surveillance van, Agent Reeves was already making calls to the prosecutor's office. "How does it feel?" she asked Sarah as they drove away from the restaurant. "Like the end of one life and the beginning of another. Any regrets?" Sarah thought about the question as they passed the suburban neighborhood where she'd lived for 8 years, where she'd believed she was building a safe and stable future for her children. "I regret trusting the wrong person," she said finally, "but I don't regret fighting back." The Denver District Attorney's office smelled like burnt coffee and bureaucracy, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glare over the conference room where Sarah sat beside Marcus, watching Prosecutor Janet Webb shuffle through stacks of evidence files. Across the table, David's attorney looked like a man who'd been handed an unwinnable case and was trying to make the best of it. "Mrs. Mitchell," Webb began, "I want to start by formally apologizing for what you've endured over the past 2 months. The charges against you are being dropped with prejudice, meaning they cannot be refiled." Sarah felt Marcus squeeze her hand under the table, but the relief she'd expected didn't come. Instead, she felt empty, drained by weeks of fighting for something that should never have been in question. "What about David?" she asked. "Mr. Mitchell has agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and filing false police reports. In exchange for his cooperation in our investigation of Amanda Chen's criminal network, he'll receive 5 years in federal prison." "And Amanda?" Webb's expression hardened. "Amanda Chen, whose real name is Amanda Castellanos, was arrested yesterday morning in Mexico City, attempting to board a flight to Spain. She's being extradited to face charges in Colorado, Arizona, and Oregon." Sarah absorbed this information with surprise. She was caught. "Your wire recording provided crucial evidence linking her to similar schemes in other states. When we shared that evidence with law enforcement in Phoenix and Portland, they were able to trace financial patterns that led directly to her location." Marcus leaned forward. "What's Sarah's role going forward?" "None. If she prefers, we have sufficient evidence to prosecute both Mr. Mitchell and Ms. Castellanos without requiring Mrs. Mitchell's testimony. However, we'd welcome her impact statement at sentencing." An impact statement. Sarah tried to imagine standing in front of a judge and describing how David's betrayal had affected her life, how Amanda's manipulation had nearly destroyed her family. The words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what she'd experienced. "I need time to think about it," Sarah said. That evening, Sarah sat in Rita's kitchen while Emma helped Michael with his tummy time, marveling at how quickly a 2-month-old baby could go from screaming to giggling. The simple domesticity of the scene felt surreal after the intensity of the past week. "Mom, Mrs. Patterson wants to know if you'll speak at our school assembly about overcoming adversity," Emma said, carefully supporting Michael's wobbly head. "What did you tell her?" "That you're the strongest person I know, but you might be too tired to talk to a bunch of middle schoolers about it right now." Sarah smiled at her daughter's diplomatic skills. "That's a very accurate assessment." Rita joined them at the table with a bottle of wine for herself and herbal tea for Sarah. "I've been thinking about your next steps, such as what you want to do with your life now that you're not facing 20 years in prison." It was a question Sarah had been avoiding. For 2 months, her entire focus had been on proving her innocence and protecting her children. Now that those immediate crises were resolved, she had to figure out how to rebuild a life she'd never expected to need. "I've been out of the workforce for 12 years, Sarah said. "My marketing experience is obsolete. I have 2 children to support, and I'm about to be a divorced single mother with no savings." "But you also have something most people don't," Rita pointed out. "What's that?" "A story that matters. Sarah, You survived something that destroys most people. You figured out how to fight back against sophisticated criminals, and you won. There are thousands of women who could benefit from hearing how you did it. Emma looked up from where she was making faces at Michael. Mom, you should write a book. A book. About what happened to you. Like that woman who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, except yours would be about fighting bad guys instead of finding yourself in Italy. Sarah laughed for the first time in weeks. I don't think publishers are looking for Eat, Pray, Sue a Mother's Guide to Financial Fraud. Why not? Rita asked seriously. Financial abuse is more common than anyone talks about. Women who discover their husbands have been hiding gambling addictions, running up secret debts, or stealing from joint accounts. Most of them never fight back because they don't know how. The idea intrigued Sarah despite herself. I wouldn't know where to start. I would, Rita said. I've been advising women on financial recovery after divorce for 15 years. What you went through was extreme, but the underlying patterns are sadly common. Over the next week, Sarah found herself thinking more about Rita's suggestion. She started writing down her experiences, initially just as a way to process everything that had happened. But as the pages accumulated, she began to see patterns and lessons that might be valuable to other women. She wrote about the warning signs she'd missed, David's increasing secrecy about finances, his defensive reactions when she asked questions about their accounts, his gradual isolation of her from their financial planning. She documented the investigation techniques she'd learned from Marcus and the FBI, the resources available to victims of financial fraud, and the legal protections that many women didn't know existed. Most importantly, she wrote about the psychological manipulation she'd endured and how she'd learned to recognize and resist it. 3 weeks after the charges against her were dropped, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Jennifer Walsh from Rocky Mountain Women's Legal Aid. We've been following your case, and we were wondering if you'd be interested in speaking at our annual conference. What kind of speaking? About financial abuse and recovery. We have about 300 attendees, attorneys, social workers, victim advocates, and survivors. Your story illustrates patterns that many of our clients experience, but few people fight back as effectively as you did. Sarah found herself saying yes before she'd fully considered the implications. The conference was held at a downtown hotel, and Sarah had expected to speak to a small breakout session. Instead, she found herself on the main stage, looking out at an audience of women who understood exactly what she'd been through. I want to start by saying that I'm not here because I'm special or particularly brave, Sarah began, her voice echoing through the ballroom. I'm here because I got angry, and sometimes anger is exactly what we need. She told her story simply and directly, focusing on the practical lessons rather than the emotional trauma. How to document suspicious financial activity, how to protect assets during a marital crisis, how to work with law enforcement when you're being framed for someone else's crimes. But it was during the question and answer session that Sarah realized the true impact of what she'd experienced. Mrs. Mitchell, said a woman in the front row, my husband has been hiding gambling debts from me for 2 years. I just discovered them yesterday. What's the first thing I should do? Document everything, Sarah said without hesitation. Bank statements, credit card bills, any communication about the debts. Then secure your own financial safety. Open accounts in your name only. Establish credit independently, and make sure you have access to money that he can't touch. What if he says I'm overreacting? What if he promises to get help and change? Sarah thought about David's tears and promises during their last conversation. Promises are easy to make and easy to break. Structural changes to protect yourself are harder to implement, but impossible for him to undo. You can hope he changes while still protecting yourself in case he doesn't. The questions continued for an hour, each one revealing how common Sarah's experience really was. Women whose husbands had forged their signatures on loans. Women whose joint accounts had been emptied without their knowledge. Women who discovered their names on credit cards they'd never applied for. After the conference, Jennifer Walsh approached Sarah with a proposal. We'd like to offer you a position with our organization. Part-time to start. Working with clients who've experienced financial abuse, you'd help them understand their legal options and connect them with resources for recovery. I don't have any formal training in law or social work, but you have something more valuable: lived experience and the knowledge of how to fight back. Sarah, most of our clients feel powerless when they come to us. They need to see someone who's been where they are and found a way through. That night, Sarah sat at Rita's kitchen table with a job offer in front of her and a future that looked completely different from anything she'd imagined 6 months ago. "What do you think?" she asked Rita. "I think you found your purpose. It's scary, starting over at 38 with 2 kids and no financial safety net. Sarah, you took on the FBI, a federal prosecutor, and a criminal network that had been operating for years. I think you can handle a new career." Sarah looked at the job offer again, then at Michael sleeping in his bouncer and Emma doing homework at the other end of the table. Her children would grow up knowing their mother as someone who fought back when attacked, someone who turned her worst experience into something that helped other people. "Okay," she said, signing the contract. "Let's do this." For the first time since receiving that misdirected text message, Sarah Mitchell felt like she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months after the charges against her were dropped, Sarah stood in the bathroom of her new apartment, applying makeup for her first television interview. The reflection staring back at her looked different from the woman who'd been arrested in Target 8 months ago. Thinner, more tired, but somehow stronger. "Mom, the camera people are here," Emma called from the living room. Sarah took a deep breath and walked out to find her small apartment transformed into a television studio. Lights, cameras, and cables filled the space where Michael had learned to crawl and where Emma did her homework each evening. "Mrs. Up Mitchell." A young woman with a clipboard approached. "I'm Jessica from Channel 7 News. We're so grateful you agreed to share your story." The interview was part of a series on financial fraud, timed to coincide with Amanda Castellanos' trial, which had begun the previous week. Sarah had decided to go public with her experience after receiving dozens of letters from women who'd seen her speak at legal conferences and victim advocacy events. "Just be yourself," the reporter, Maria Santos, advised as they settled in front of the cameras. "Tell people what you want them to know." The interview began with the basic facts: the affair, the frame-up, the arrest. But Maria was more interested in what came after. "How did you rebuild your life after everything you'd believed about your marriage turned out to be false?" Sarah considered the question, thinking about the past 6 months. "I had to learn to trust my own judgment again. For 15 years, I'd deferred to David's expertise about money, about career decisions, about what was best for our family. After discovering how wrong I'd been about him, I had to figure out what I actually believed and wanted." "And what did you discover?" "That I'm much stronger than I thought I was, and that helping other women navigate similar situations gives my experience meaning." After the interview, Sarah drove to Denver Community Bank for a meeting she'd been anticipating for months. The bank had settled her civil lawsuit for $2 million, money that would provide security for her children and allow her to expand her work with financial abuse victims. But more importantly, the bank was implementing new policies based on Sarah's recommendations for identifying and preventing internal fraud. "Mrs. Mitchell," the bank president, Robert Chen, no relation to Amanda despite the shared surname, greeted her in the lobby. "Thank you for working with us on these changes." They toured the updated security protocols, the employee monitoring systems, and the victim advocacy resources that were now standard practice for the bank's fraud investigation process. "We're calling them the Mitchell Protocols," Chen explained as they reviewed the training materials. "Every employee will be educated about recognizing signs of financial abuse and equipped to help customers who might be victims." Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions looking at the procedures named in her honor. "I wish none of this had been necessary." "But it was necessary," Chen replied. "Your case exposed vulnerabilities that existed at banks across the country. The changes we're implementing here are being adopted by other institutions nationwide." That evening, Sarah attended David's sentencing hearing, sitting in the back row of the courtroom with Emma beside her. She'd wrestled with whether to bring her daughter, but Emma had insisted she wanted to see her father take responsibility for his actions. David looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, his hair graying at the temples in a way that aged him beyond his 42 years. When given the opportunity to speak before sentencing, he turned towards Sarah and Emma. "I want to apologize to my family, especially to my wife Sarah, who showed more courage and integrity during this ordeal than I showed during our entire marriage. I hope someday my children will understand that good people can make terrible choices, and that taking responsibility for those choices is the first step toward becoming better." Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced David to 5 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. As the bailiff led him away, David caught Sarah's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Sarah wasn't sure what he was thanking her for, not testifying against him, bringing Emma to see him sentenced, or simply surviving what he'd put her through. But she nodded, recognizing it as a final goodbye to the man she'd once loved. Outside the courthouse, Emma was quiet as they walked to their car. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked. "Sad for Dad, but proud of you. Proud of me. For not being bitter. For helping other people instead of just being angry." That weekend, Sarah received a call that changed everything. "Sarah, this is Dr. Elizabeth Gilbert's assistant calling." Sarah nearly dropped the phone. Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love, the woman whose journey of self-discovery had inspired millions of women to find their own strength. "Mrs. Gilbert read about your case and your advocacy work. She's wondering if you'd be interested in co-authoring a book about financial recovery after betrayal." The book project consumed Sarah's evenings for the next 6 months. She and Gilbert worked together to create a practical guide for women experiencing financial abuse. Combining Sarah's hard-won expertise with Gilbert's gift for translating complex emotional experiences into accessible wisdom. Financially Framed: A Survivor's Guide to Financial Abuse and Recovery was published the following spring to immediate acclaim. The book tour took Sarah across the country, speaking to audiences of women who saw their own experiences reflected in her story. But it was during a book signing in Portland that Sarah met someone who would become central to her new life. Detective James Rodriguez approached her table after her presentation, holding a copy of her book. "Mrs. Mitchell, I worked on a case similar to yours about 2 years ago. Amanda Castellanos destroyed a family in our jurisdiction before moving on to Denver. James was 44, a widower raising 2 teenage daughters on his own. His wife had died of cancer 3 years earlier, and he understood the challenge of rebuilding life after devastating loss. "Would you like to get coffee?" he asked. "I'd love to hear more about how you help women in these situations." Coffee led to dinner, which led to long conversations about resilience, single parenthood, and the possibility of trusting someone new after profound betrayal. "I'm not looking for someone to rescue me," Sarah told him during one of their early dates. "I've learned to rescue myself." "Good," James replied. "I'm not looking for someone to rescue either. I'm looking for someone who understands that building a new life requires courage." A year later, James proposed during a family camping trip that included Emma, Michael, and his daughters Rebecca and Sophia. The proposal was simple and honest, much like their relationship. "Sarah, you've shown me what it means to fight for the people you love. Will you let me fight alongside you for the rest of our lives?" The wedding was small, held in Rita's backyard with Emma as maid of honor, and Michael as an energetic ring bearer who tried to eat the flowers. The guest list included Agent Reeves, Marcus, Dr. Hartwell, and dozens of women Sarah had helped through Rocky Mountain Women's Legal Aid. During her speech, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, I thought my life was ending. I was facing prison, losing my children, and discovering that everything I'd believed about my marriage was a lie. I felt powerless and alone. She looked out at the faces of friends who'd become family, colleagues who'd become confidants, and a man who'd shown her that love could be based on respect rather than dependence. But I learned something important during those dark months. We're never as powerless as we think we are. Even when someone else writes a false story about who we are, we still get to write the next chapter ourselves. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Sarah sat with Michael on her lap, watching Emma teach James's daughters a complicated clapping game. This was her real victory, not the legal vindication or the financial settlement, but the family she'd built from the wreckage of her old life. Rita approached with 2 glasses of champagne, settling beside Sarah on the porch steps. "Any regrets?" Rita asked, echoing Agent Reeves's question from 2 years earlier. Sarah considered everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. "I regret that my children had to go through their father's betrayal. I regret that other women are going through what I experienced, but I don't regret fighting back." What's next? The Phoenix Foundation launches next month. We'll provide legal aid, financial counseling, and advocacy training for women experiencing economic abuse. And personally, Sarah looked at James helping Emma with s'mores, his patience with her daughter evident in every interaction. "Personally, I'm learning what a healthy partnership looks like. It's different from what I had with David, but it's better." As the last guest departed and her new family cleaned up the remnants of the celebration, Sarah received an unexpected text from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your wedding, sister-in-law. See you soon. Victoria Chen." Sarah stared at the message, her blood running cold. Amanda had mentioned a sister during the FBI investigation, but Victoria had never been identified or located. She showed the text to James, who immediately called his contacts in law enforcement. But as they sat in their wedding finery, discussing security measures and protective protocols, Sarah realized that her story wasn't over. Amanda Castellanos was serving 15 years in federal prison, but her network was apparently still active, and Victoria Chen, whoever she was, had been watching Sarah's new life, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But this time, Sarah wasn't the isolated, trusting housewife who'd been easy to manipulate and frame. She was surrounded by people who knew her worth, protected by systems she'd helped create, and armed with knowledge earned through the worst experience of her life. "Let her come," Sarah said, deleting the message and putting her phone away. "I'm not the same woman she thinks she's dealing with." The text message arrived exactly 1 year after Sarah's wedding, during the Phoenix Foundation's annual fundraising gala at the Brown Palace Hotel. Sarah was accepting an award for victim advocacy when her phone buzzed with the familiar unknown number. "Happy anniversary, Sarah. Time to pay for what you did to my sister. V.C." Sarah finished her speech without missing a beat, but her hands trembled slightly as she handed the microphone back to the presenter. In the audience, James caught her eye, his detective instincts immediately recognizing that something was wrong. During the cocktail reception, Sarah pulled James aside and showed him the message. "Victoria's been watching us for a year," James said grimly. "She knows about our anniversary, which means she knows our routine, our habits, probably our home address. Should we call Agent Reeves?" "Already on it," James was texting as he spoke. "But Sarah, I want you and the kids staying at Rita's until we figure out what we're dealing with." The next morning, Agent Reeves briefed them in the FBI field office, her expression more serious than Sarah had ever seen it. "Victoria Chen is Amanda's half-sister, and she's significantly more dangerous than Amanda ever was. Amanda was a con artist who manipulated people for money. Victoria is a true sociopath with a history of violence. She spread photos across the conference table, showing crime scenes from Seattle, Las Vegas, and Miami. Victoria doesn't just steal money and disappear. She destroys people's lives completely, then moves on to the next target." "How does she operate?" Sarah asked, studying the images of burned houses and vandalized cars. "Psychological warfare first. She learns everything about her target's life, then systematically destroys their sense of security. She'll start with small things. Maybe your car gets vandalized, or someone breaks into your house without taking anything. The goal is to make you feel constantly watched and vulnerable." James leaned forward. "Then what?" "Then she escalates. Identity theft, planted evidence, false accusations. She'll try to turn your friends against you, get you fired from your job, maybe even frame you for crimes. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Like Amanda did to me. Exactly. Except Victoria learned from Amanda's mistakes. She's more careful, more patient, and more ruthless. Over the next week, Sarah moved through her life like someone expecting an attack from every direction. The Foundation's offices installed additional security. James arranged for police patrols past their house, and Rita's guest room became Sarah's temporary headquarters for planning their defense. But the attack, when it came, was more subtle than anyone expected. Sarah was reviewing grant applications at the Foundation when her assistant knocked on her door. "Sarah, there's a woman here who says she's a reporter from the Washington Post. She wants to interview you about financial fraud advocacy." Victoria Chen was beautiful in the same calculated way Amanda had been, but there was something harder in her eyes, something that made Sarah's skin crawl even before she spoke. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Victoria said, using Sarah's married name with emphasis. "I'm Victoria Parker from the Post. I'm writing a story about the long-term impact of financial fraud on families." Sarah noticed immediately that Victoria had given a different last name than the one in her threatening text. She was operating under an assumed identity, probably with forged credentials. "I appreciate your interest," Sarah said carefully, "but I don't give interviews without scheduling them in advance." "Of course, but I was hoping we could have a quick chat about your foundation's work. Specifically, how you've monetized your victimhood into a profitable nonprofit career." The accusation was designed to provoke, and Sarah felt her temper flare before she remembered Agent Reeves' advice about staying calm and documenting everything. "I'm afraid I don't understand your implication," Sarah said, discreetly activating the recording app on her phone. "Come now, Mrs. Rodriguez, you've built an entire industry around your sob story. Book deals, speaking fees, a foundation that pays you a six-figure salary. Some people might say you've profited quite handsomely from being framed for theft." Sarah realized that Victoria was trying to plant seeds of doubt about her motives, the same way Amanda had planted cash in her purse. But this time, Sarah was ready. "Ms. Parker, I think this interview is over. Please leave my office." "Just one more question," Victoria said, standing slowly. "How do you sleep at night, knowing that your sister-in-law is in federal prison because of your lies?" "Amanda Castellanos is in prison because she committed multiple felonies across several states. Her conviction had nothing to do with my testimony." "Amanda Chen," Victoria corrected with a cold smile. "Her name is Amanda Chen, and she's my sister. And you're going to pay for destroying her life." After Victoria left, Sarah immediately called Agent Reeves and James, then gathered her staff for an emergency meeting. "I need everyone to be aware that the Foundation may be targeted for harassment or worse," she explained. "Anyone who doesn't feel comfortable working under these circumstances should take paid leave until the situation is resolved." To her surprise, every staff member chose to stay. Maria, her assistant, spoke for the group. "Sarah, you've helped every one of us in some way. Jessica wouldn't have left her abusive husband without the legal aid you connected her with. Tom's sister got her identity theft case solved because of your advocacy training. We're not abandoning you now." Over the next month, Victoria's campaign of psychological warfare intensified. Sarah's car tires were slashed 3 times. Her credit cards were used for unauthorized purchases. Someone hacked the Foundation's website and posted fake articles claiming Sarah was embezzling donor funds. But each attack only strengthened the network of support Sarah had built over the past 3 years. Rita hired a cybersecurity expert to protect the Foundation's online presence. James coordinated with federal and local law enforcement to document every incident. Dr. Hartwell provided crisis counseling for Sarah's staff and family. Most importantly, the community of women Sarah had helped rallied around her. Financial abuse survivors organized a security volunteer network, taking shifts watching Sarah's house and the Foundation offices. Former clients contributed to a legal defense fund. Supporters launched a social media campaign countering Victoria's false narratives. "She's not fighting just Sarah anymore," Agent Reeves observed during a strategy meeting. "She's fighting an entire movement." The confrontation came 6 weeks after Victoria's office visit. Sarah was leaving a late meeting at the foundation when Victoria appeared in the parking garage, blocking her path to the elevator. "Hello, sister-in-law." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to the panic button James had insisted she carry. "Victoria, you've made this much more difficult than it needed to be. All I wanted was for you to admit that you lied about Amanda, drop your victim act, and disappear quietly. I never lied about Amanda. Everything I said was true and supported by evidence. Evidence you manufactured with help from the FBI." Victoria stepped closer, and Sarah could see the madness lurking behind her composed exterior. This wasn't someone seeking justice for her sister. This was someone who enjoyed inflicting pain. "Victoria, whatever you think Amanda told you about what happened, she was lying. Your sister framed me for theft as part of a criminal conspiracy that victimized dozens of women across multiple states. My sister was a businesswoman who got caught up with weak men who needed someone to blame for their failures." Sarah realized that Victoria genuinely believed Amanda was innocent, or had constructed an alternate reality where Amanda's crimes were justified. There would be no reasoning with someone who refused to accept basic facts. "This conversation is over," Sarah said, pressing the panic button. "No, Sarah, this conversation is just beginning." Victoria pulled out a manila envelope, identical to the one Sarah had found by her car 3 years earlier. Inside were photographs of Emma at school, Michael at daycare, James at work, and Rita at home. "I know where everyone you care about spends their time," Victoria said calmly. "I know their routines, their vulnerabilities, their weaknesses. You destroyed my sister's life, and now I'm going to destroy yours, piece by piece." The parking garage suddenly filled with the sound of sirens as police cars surrounded the building. Victoria looked around in confusion as officers emerged from stairwells and behind pillars. "Victoria Chen, you're under arrest for stalking, harassment, and making terroristic threats," Agent Reeves announced as she approached with handcuffs. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, we can—" Sarah held up her phone, which had been recording the entire conversation. "Plus the surveillance cameras in this garage, the phone records showing you sent threatening messages, and the evidence you just handed me documenting your surveillance of my family." As Victoria was led away in handcuffs, she turned back to Sarah with a smile that was pure malice. "This isn't over. There are others who believe in Amanda's innocence, others who think you need to pay." "Maybe," Sarah replied, "but next time, I'll be ready for them too." 6 months later, Victoria Chen was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for stalking, cybercrime, and making terroristic threats. The judge noted that her systematic campaign against Sarah represented a particular dangerous form of victim retaliation that required substantial deterrence. Sarah watched the sentencing from the gallery, feeling a complex mix of relief and sadness. Victoria had chosen to spend years of her life seeking revenge for crimes Amanda had actually committed, becoming a criminal herself in the process. After the hearing, Sarah and James walked through downtown Denver, past the courthouse where she'd been arraigned 4 years earlier, past the bank where David had worked, past the restaurant where her marriage had effectively ended. "Any regrets?" James asked, echoing the question that had become a touchstone in Sarah's journey. "I regret that Amanda and Victoria made choices that hurt so many people. I regret that other women are still experiencing what I went through, but I don't regret fighting back, and I don't regret building something positive from something terrible." They stopped at the corner where Sarah had once sat in her car, pregnant and betrayed, staring at a USB drive that would change her life forever. "What would you tell that woman?" James asked, somehow understanding the significance of the location. Sarah thought about the frightened pregnant housewife who discovered her husband's affair in a doctor's waiting room, who'd been arrested for crimes she didn't commit, who'd felt powerless against forces she didn't understand. "I'd tell her that she's stronger than she knows, that the worst experience of her life is going to become the source of her greatest strength, and that fighting back isn't just about winning, it's about refusing to let other people's choices define who you are." As they walked home to their blended family, past the foundation offices where Sarah helped other women find their own strength, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. now 16 and volunteering at the Foundation's summer program. Mom, a woman came in today who reminded me of you when this all started. She's pregnant. Her husband emptied their accounts for gambling debts, and she's scared she'll lose her kids. I told her you'd want to meet her tomorrow. Sarah smiled, typing back her response. Tell her I'll be there. And Emma, tell her that whatever feels impossible right now, it isn't. Tell her that someone who's been where she is says she's going to be okay. Because that was Sarah's real victory, in the end. Not the money from the lawsuit or the recognition for her advocacy work, but the knowledge that every woman who walked into the Phoenix Foundation would leave knowing that she wasn't alone, that she wasn't powerless, and that her story wasn't over. The cycle of betrayal and recovery, of victims becoming survivors, becoming advocates, would continue. But each time, the network of support grew stronger. The resources became more comprehensive, and the message became clearer. You are not alone. You are not powerless, and your story isn't over. Sarah Mitchell Rodriguez had learned that lesson the hard way, but she'd made sure that for the women who came after her, learning it would be a little bit easier. And that, she reflected as she walked home to her family, was the best revenge of all, turning someone else's attempt to destroy her into a force that protected other women from similar destruction. The last laugh, indeed.